Some stories are never finished, they're just filed away. Welcome to Chronicles of the Obscure, London 1888. Imagine the air, thick with the smoke of coal fires and the low-hanging fog rolling off the Thames. In the district of Whitechapel, it's a different kind of thickness, a suffocating fear. The gas lamps cast long distorted shadows down narrow cobbled alleyways slick with grime. This isn't just a place, it's a labyrinth of poverty and desperation. And through this labyrinth stalks a phantom. 5 women, all struggling to survive on the fringes of society, are found dead. Their murders are not just brutal, they are grotesque, surgical in their savagery. The Metropolitan Police are swamped, their investigation a chaotic swirl of dead ends and public panic. They have no suspects, no witnesses willing to talk, and no clear motive. All they have is a nickname, a name born not from whispers in the dark alleys, but from the crisp, clean pages of a letter, Jack the Ripper. But this was no isolated message. In the wake of the terror, a deluge of correspondence flooded police stations and news agencies. Over 200 letters, each one claiming to be the killer. Most were obvious fakes, crude attempts at notoriety, cruel pranks from a public both terrified and fascinated. They were quickly dismissed, but one was different. On October 16, 1888, George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of local citizens who had taken it upon themselves to patrol the streets, received a small cardboard box. The postage was paid. The address scrawled. Inside, nestled in a piece of paper, was a horrifying artifact, half of a human kidney, preserved in what smelled like wine. Accompanying it was a letter, barely literate and chillingly direct. It began with just 2 words, "From hell." This wasn't just ink on paper. It was a physical piece of the crime scene, a trophy sent to taunt the very people trying to stop the slaughter. The ultimate question, which has echoed for over a century, is simple yet profound. Was it real? Or was it the most depraved hoax in criminal history? Let's step into the evidence locker and catalogue the key pieces of this paper trail of terror. The story of the Ripper letters really begins on September 27th, when a letter addressed to the Central News Agency arrived. Written in red ink, it was cocky, taunting, and for the first time, it introduced the world to the killer's infamous moniker, "Dear Boss." It started before bragging about his work and promising that his knife was still nice and sharp. He signed off with the chillingly playful name, Jack the Ripper. The media, hungry for a narrative, seized upon it. The name was plastered across every newspaper, and suddenly the phantom had an identity. Many experts today, looking back, believe the Dear Boss letter was a clever, if cynical, hoax. They point the finger at a journalist, perhaps a man named Tom Bullen from the Central News Agency, suggesting he forged it to create a sensation, to sell more papers, to turn a series of grim murders into a blockbuster story. And it worked. Just days later, on October 1st, a postcard arrived, also at the Central News Agency. It was smeared with what looked like blood, though this was never confirmed, referencing the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, which had occurred only hours apart. It was signed Saucy Jackie. It boasted of the double event, and its tone matched the Dear Boss letter perfectly, reinforcing the persona of a cocksure theatrical killer. If the first letter was a journalistic stunt, this was the successful sequel. But then came the From Hell letter. This was a different beast entirely. It arrived with its gruesome package for George Lusk. The letter itself was a stark contrast to the others. There was no playful signature, no witty bravado. The handwriting was a semi-literate scrawl, full of spelling and grammatical errors. It read, "From hell, Mr. Lusk, sore, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried, and ate it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only ward a will longer." It was signed, simply, "Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." The tone was raw, guttural, and deeply unsettling. The kidney itself was immediately sent for examination. Dr. Thomas Openshaw at the London Hospital Museum concluded it was a human kidney. Specifically the left one. He noted it was preserved in spirits of wine, likely gin or whiskey, and, crucially, exhibited signs of Bright's disease, a kidney affliction. Catherine Eddowes, the Ripper's 4th victim, was known to have suffered from this very condition. The length of the renal artery attached to the kidney fragment was also consistent with it having been removed from her body. The evidence seemed terrifyingly concrete. Unlike the other letters, this wasn't just a claim, it was a receipt. So, let us open the case file and examine the theories that have swirled around these letters for over 130 years. On one side of the theory board, we have the compelling argument for a massive multi-layered hoax. The Dear Boss letter, as we've seen, bears all the hallmarks of a journalistic invention. In the cutthroat world of Victorian print media, a killer who wrote to the press was a goldmine. It created a direct line between the public and the monster, a narrative that was impossible to resist. If a reporter did indeed forge the first letter, then the Saucy Jackie postcard was a natural follow-up to keep the story boiling. The From Hell letter could then be seen as a horrifying escalation of this game by a different party. Someone, inspired by the media frenzy, decided to take the prank to a new, grotesque level. This brings us to Theory 2, a genuine communication from the killer. The kidney is the linchpin of this entire argument. How could anyone other than the murderer, or perhaps a police officer or morgue attendant involved in the case, have obtained it? Catherine Eddowes' body was found with her left kidney and uterus removed. The specimen sent to Lusk was a left kidney. Dr. Openshaw's analysis, confirming it was human and afflicted with the same disease Eddowes had, is incredibly powerful evidence. Proponents of this theory argue that the drastic change in tone and literacy between the Dear Boss and From Hell letters is proof of their different origins. The first two were a hoax that gave the killer a name. The third was the killer himself, finally speaking in his own, crude voice. The claim of cannibalism, of frying and eating the other half, adds a layer of primal horror that feels disturbingly authentic, a world away from the theatrical flourish of Jack the Ripper. Theory 3 offers a middle ground, a morbid prankster, but one with specialized knowledge. Imagine a medical student, a hospital porter, or a morgue assistant. In the 1880s, medical specimens were not as tightly controlled as they are today. Someone with access to a pathology lab could have obtained a diseased human kidney. Hearing about Eddowes' missing organ in the sensational press reports, this individual could have constructed the ultimate terrifying prank, mailing the specimen to Lusk to sow yet more panic and fear. It would have required a chillingly callous mind, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. It would explain the physical evidence without needing the sender to be the actual murderer. Finally, we have a more conspiratorial angle. Theory 4, a police or vigilante diversion. This is the most fringe theory, but it has its adherents. The idea is that the police, desperate and failing, might have fabricated letters to either create a psychological profile to flush out the killer, or to control the public narrative and appear more in control than they were. Alternatively, a member of the Vigilance Committee itself might have sent the From Hell letter to Lusk to create a sense of urgency, to spur the police into more drastic action, or even to cast suspicion in a particular direction. It's a Machiavellian view, but in the chaos of Whitechapel, stranger things were happening. In the modern era, we look to science for answers, but the Ripper letters remain stubbornly silent. The From Hell letter and the kidney are long lost to history. Even if they existed today, a century of handling would have rendered any DNA evidence completely useless, contaminated beyond recovery. Modern handwriting analysis has been applied to high-quality photographs and facsimiles of the letters. The consensus is that the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter were almost certainly written by 3 different people. This supports the idea of a hoax that was later co-opted by either the real killer or a different prankster, but it proves nothing definitively. The true, lasting impact of these letters is not in the evidence they provided, but in the myth they created. They transformed an anonymous butcher into a literary villain. Jack the Ripper became the taunting, intelligent, and elusive fiend who played games with the police. This image, largely born from the Dear Boss letter, has completely overshadowed the grim reality of the crimes. The letters may have actively poisoned the investigation, sending detectives on wild goose chases, focusing their efforts on finding an educated man who could write with such flair, when the real killer might have been the semi-literate brute who wrote from hell. So the letters exist in this strange limbo, a case study in how legend can consume truth. They gave a voice to the terror of Whitechapel, but it may have been a ventriloquist's act, a Victorian-era troll, a cynical journalist, or a genuine monster. We may never know who was truly holding the pen. The one piece that cuts through the noise is the kidney. That small, preserved piece of an organ remains the most tangible, chilling link to the crimes themselves. Was it the killer's gruesome signature, a genuine message from hell? Or was it just the centerpiece of a magnificent, horrifying lie? The file remains open, the ink is dry, but the story is far from over. What is your verdict? Do you believe any of the Ripper letters were real, especially the one from hell? Let me know your theory in the comments below. Thanks for joining us in the archives. Subscribe to Chronicles of the Obscure for more stories that lie just beyond the light.